Okay. Okay, we're connected. Oh, hope everybody can hear me and see me. Getting started back again after a month's break. I had a nice retreat, so we'll get started with today's talk. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Okay, so I decided today to talk about the mythology of the Cakravartin, or in Sanskrit it's Cakravartin, because this last few days, for some reason, I've been getting a few questions about this, so I thought I'll give a talk about it. The Cakravartin is the wheel-turning monarch. It's the universal monarch. It's another way it's sometimes phrased in English. He's one type of Mahaparisa. Mahaparisa means a great person, and a great person will become either a Buddha or a Cakravartin. If the person, when they grow up, decides to renounce the world and take a spiritual path, then they'll become a Buddha. But if they decide to remain in the world and follow a worldly or secular career, they'll go to the very peak of that road and become the ruler of the whole world, a Cakravartin. So the Cakravartin is kind of a secular equivalent of the Buddha. Many of you will probably be familiar with the story of Siddhartha Gautama. When he was born, the Brahmins came and examined the baby, and they recognized the marks on the baby that he was a great man, a Mahaparisa, and predicted he would either be a Buddha or a Cakravartin. And the Buddha's father, Suddhodana, being a worldly man and ambitious for his lineage, tried to encourage the young Gautama, the young Siddhartha, into following a worldly path, so he'd become a world ruler. But of course, as we know, he became the Buddha. When the Siddhartha left home, when he reached the gate of the palace compound, Mara was waiting for him, and Mara told him, "Turn back, Siddhartha, turn back. Within 1 week's time, the wheel will appear for you, and you will become a Cakravartin and rule the whole earth." And the Buddha to be, Siddhartha, said, "I know this, Mara, and I reject that. I wish to seek end of suffering." So then the phrase in Pali is the Buddha to be, the Bodhisattva, tossed aside the rulership of the whole world like a lump of spittle. So it takes a great visionary indeed to reject the rulership of the whole world, to seek a path of ultimate liberation. The 32 marks of a Mahaparisa are listed, and it's loosely based on a pre-Buddhist conception of marks of a great person. They don't match up exactly, but the idea was present. If these marks are to be taken literally, we can say that the Buddha must have had a very odd appearance. It includes, for example, that his arms were so long he could touch his knees without bending. His tongue was so long that he could touch the point between his eyebrows with the tip of his tongue. There's one that says he walked with a level tread, which one on the surface it means he was flat-footed, but it also means that the ground in front of him magically was always smooth. He could walk over rocky ground, stumps and things, and the ground, his foot would always land on flat, level earth. This is also taken to be the explanation of how he walked in two strides from Savati to the Tawatingsa on the peak of Mount Sinaru. Uh, he just took an ordinary, this is when he went up to the city of the gods, Tawatingsa, on the top of Mount Sinaru to teach the Abhidhamma. He just took two ordinary steps, but the mountains bent under his foot and then rose up again. So his first step took him to the top of Ugandhara, and the second took him to the top of Sinaru, which is Sinaru is, if you recall, is 84,000 yojanas high, which is an enormous height. It works out to be a greater distance than what we currently estimate the distance from the Earth to the Moon. So the Cakravartin is called the wheel-turning monarch because the symbol of the Cakravartin is a wheel that appears in the sky to mark that his recognition of his reign as Cakravartin. This is a physical wheel that appears in the sky, and there's a description in one of the texts, a very long, elaborate description of the wheel with all the accoutrements of the various features of the wheel, various tubes and decorations on the spokes and so on. And this appears in the sky, and the people in the town see this bright light in the sky, and they start discussing amongst themselves, what is that? Is it a second moon? What could be causing this this new light in the sky? And the wheel settles in the air over the royal palace of the man. He's already a king of one country. He appears over his palace and marks his status as a Cakravartin. He gets this status. Well, first of all, he's born as a great man, but he's also living according to morality. He's keeping the precepts and doing the Uposatha fast, which qualifies him for this position. And he anoints the wheel by leaning out of the window and sprinkling it with water, and then the wheel moves off, and he follows it. He gets into his chariot and follows it, and he flies up into the air. And all his whole entourage, his ministers and his army, and all his wives, his townsfolk, thousands of people that fly up in the air following him. And this whole entourage goes flying off, and they land on all four continents. The physical geography as conceived, if you're not familiar with it, is the Mount Sinaru is in the middle, and in the ocean around it there are four continents. And the one that is the known world is Jambudipa. And it's called the southern continent. It's triangular in shape. And I think the reason for this is because to the ancient Indians, India was the known world. So Jambudipa is, in later times, is used as a synonym for India. But in these, the original meaning was the southern continent, the whole known world. So he flies to all four continents with his whole entourage. And they land on the continent and establish a colony. They set up a settlement, and some of them stay there. and the other kings that rule in that continent, they come with their armies, but when they see the wheel they're in the sky, they're overawed, and without battle they submit to the Cakravartin and become his vassals. And he gives them an admonishment, which is to keep the precepts, to keep the five precepts, and then they can continue to enjoy their rulership under his overlord position. And so he rules the entire earth without violence, without stick or sword, and he conquers the whole world. Uh, um, and so this becomes the model of ideal kingship. You'd say that the Buddhism had from the beginning a kind of ambivalent attitude towards government and kingship. In the Aganya Sutta, we see the origin of kingship in terms of a very down to earth secular kind of social contract, and this was presented in direct criticism of the Brahmanical view that the gods had established kingship, that it was something, from beyond this earth. In the Aganya Sutta, it's described that as people started practicing agriculture and growing crops in fields, there were some people who were turned criminal, and instead of doing the work of raising their own rice, they would raid other people's fields, and then the people would defend their property by fighting. And so the society, which had been happy without any government before, now was turning to violence and chaos, and the people got together and agreed we need to have somebody to rule over us and punish the evildoers. And they elected amongst themselves the first king, and he had the monopoly of force, which is the mark of sovereignty. He was symbolically given the danda, the stick, and we still see that in modern times. It's still often a symbol of power in government. Is a mace or a stick, or the fasces, the bundle of sticks. These are, for example, in the British system, which we follow in Canada here. When Parliament is in session, the mace has to be on the table for the law to be promulgated, and they have this whole kind of elaborate ceremony when they open Parliament of carrying in this big club, the mace, and they lay it on the table. And if the mace is not on the table, which they'll sometimes remove it so they can have a informal discussion. Nothing counts. Nothing. They call that the committee of the whole. The decisions only count if the mace is on the table, the danda, the stick. So that's a very ancient symbology. You can see in the American Congress, behind when they have a meeting of Congress in the House of Representatives, behind the speaker's chair, and there's in the wall there's two fasces, bundles of sticks with axes. So the kingship was established on a purely secular level, and so it was seen as a kind of necessary evil. If everybody was kept the precepts, we wouldn't need any kind of government at all. People could just live happily and sort their own problems out. But because a lot of people don't keep the precepts, and they're stealing and robbing and cheating and lying and violence, then you need somebody to keep order. The other aspect of government that's burdensome in ancient times and even down to modern times is, of course, taxation. And this is in one sutta, the Buddha talks about the dangers of attachment to wealth, because wealth is impermanent and insecure. And he lists different ways that your wealth can be destroyed, such as flood, fire, thieves. And one of the things he mentions is kings. Which means the king could just take your wealth. But the Cakravartin, which marks him out again as a magical and a mythological ideal, he doesn't have to resort to taxation. The government of the world is financed by jewels and gold that is magically recovered from the floor of the sea. It's flying overhead with the wheel. At some point, the wheel opens up a chasm in the sea, like parts the waters, so that you have there's a passage down to the floor of the sea. They go down there and they scoop up in buckets all the gold and jewels that are in that spot. And this government is financed. And he provides, instead of taxing the people, he provides for the people. And there's some discussion of in one sutta, there's a detailed history of one of the previous Cakravartis, Mahasudasana, who built all these facilities for people where they could get food and clothing and so forth for free. Cakravartin is also considered to be the peak or supreme position of human happiness, although it's still considered to be less pleasurable than existence as a dewa. But it's as good as you can get as a human. And again, we have a Mahasudasana, a description of his possessions. He had, and it's always lots of 84,000, which is a number, the ancient 84,000 cattle, 84,000 wives, 84,000 of this and that and the other. So he had everything in terms of sense pleasures, sense desires that a human being could want. And this includes something called the seven treasures. The Cakravartin always has seven remarkable or magical treasures that appear for him, beginning with the wheel. That's treasure number one, the wheel that appears in the sky and marks him as a Cakravartin. He has a magical elephant, a white elephant with an enormous strength and that can also fly through the air. And he rides around on this elephant. A horse that does the same. It's described in some detail. It's a very beautiful Sindh horse. Sindh is a region of India that was in the north that was famous for its horses, and horses that came from Sindh were considered the best. And this was a special one that could also fly. He had a jewel treasure. This is a very large jewel that glowed from its own light and could light up the whole palace and the town. So they didn't need even lamps or anything at night. This jewel lit up the whole area. And then he had four human treasures in his entourage, beginning with the what's called the Itiratana, the woman treasure, which would become his chief queen, who is described as being beautiful beyond ordinary human beauty, looked more like a dewa. And it said that ordinary men just glancing at her would lose their wits and become deranged. Um, and one kind of charming detail of this, it says that in the hot season, her limbs were cool to the touch, and in the cold season, they were warm to the touch. Then he had the the treasurer, or it's Gahapati, uh, literally householder. He was a man of great wealth who became his treasurer and managed the finances. And there's a story that one of the Chakravartis wanted to test the skill of his treasurer, so he invited him out on a boat ride on the river. And when they got to the middle of the river, he said, "Treasurer, I need wealth for a project I want to undertake." And the treasurer says, "Very good, sir. As soon as we get back to shore, I'll arrange it." And he said, "No, I want it right now." So the treasurer says, "Very good, sir." And he reaches down into the water and fishes around and comes up with a bag of gold. And he says, "Will this suffice?" He says, "It'll do for now." Uh, and finally, I said four, there's three. I'm sorry. The third one and the last treasure is the counselor treasure, or advisor treasure. He's a very wise man who becomes like his prime minister and gives him advice, and says we should do this, we shouldn't do that. There's a few different stories about Chakravartis. One is that there was a Chakravarti one time flying overhead with on his elephant, and they came to a certain spot, and the elephant stopped still in the air, wouldn't go forward, and the king kept poking him with the goad and whipping him, and he wouldn't move. And finally, the king actually whipped him to death, stuck him with the goad, and the elephant died. And his advisor told him, "Sire, your elephant is dead. You need a new one." And the new one appeared, and he jumped onto the new one, and the dead one fell to the ground. So he went down, and then the advisor says, "We should go down to the ground and investigate." And it turned out that the spot that they were going to fly over was the Bodhi Mandala. This is the spot where all the Buddhas become enlightened. It's a spot near Bodh Gaya, and it's a sacred spot, and it's sometimes called the navel of the world. And the elephant, out of respect, wouldn't fly over the Bodhi Mandala. So when the king knew this was the Bodhi Mandala, he had a shrine built and a wall put around it, and gave it great honor and respect. There's one very remarkable Chakravarti who even exceeded the power and authority of all the others. This is the King Mandata. After he'd conquered all four continents and enjoyed sense pleasure for a long time, he became restless and discontented, and he asked his advisor, "Is there any place else left better than this?" And his advisor said, "There's the heaven of the four great kings halfway up Sinnaru." So they took all their armies and the wheel, and they flew up to the heaven of the four great kings, which is on the slopes of Sinnaru. And the deities came out with flowers in their hands and submitted to his rule, and he became the king of the Chatu Maharajika realm. And he also had this extremely long lifespan. This is another feature of Chakravartis, is that they have longer lifespans than ordinary humans, and he lived at a time when the human lifespan was many thousands of years. So he had an extremely long lifespan, and he ruled and by living in the land of the gods, his life was extended even more. So he ruled there for many thousands of years. Then he became discontented again, and his advisor says there's still the heaven of the 33, Tawatingsa. So they flew up to Tawatingsa, and he wasn't able to take over Tawatingsa completely, but Saka agreed to share power with him, and they ruled together in Tawatingsa. And his lifespan was so long that 36 Sakas came and went. And a lifespan of a Saka is very, very many millions of years. And so the Saka is the king of the Tawatingsa realm. And when one Saka dies, there's a new one appears. So he went through 36 Sakas, and still he ruled there. And then he was still discontented, and his mind conceived the plan, I'll kill Saka and rule the whole kingdom myself. But when he had this evil thought, he lost all his power and fell to earth. And he lay broken on the ground out in front of the palace, and people came out to talk to him, and they asked him if he had any last words, and he said, "Yes, well, I've learned that there's no satisfying of sense pleasure." And this is the moral lesson of the story. He got everything he wanted, everything you could possibly imagine, and it didn't satisfy him. He so always wanted more and more until it came to his destruction. So this mythology of the Cakravartin became very important in later times. The King Asoka, who was he was the great Buddhist emperor of India, and he's the first ruler of any kind who united just about the whole of the subcontinent. He deliberately used the imagery and symbolism of the Cakravartin and claimed the title of being a Cakravartin of one continent. Cakravartin rules all four continents, but he said he didn't rule the other three. He just ruled Jambudipa. So he was known as a Dipa Cakravartin, a one continent Cakravartin. And used the wheel as a symbol. You can see it in the art and the statuary. And even today, to the current time, on the Indian national flag includes a silken wheel. So this symbol that originated with the Cakravartis in the Buddhist literature carries on as a symbol of authority in India today. In Southeast Asia, in Buddhist countries in Southeast Asia, this ideal of the Cakravartin was always held up as the ideal kingship. And there's an interesting book by a man called Tambaya, a Sri Lankan. It's called World Renouncer and World Conqueror. Who talks about this the myth of the Cakravartin and how it plays out in the practical politics of Southeast Asia in the Middle Ages and down to modern times. The kings claiming the kind of authority of a local Cakravartin. There's another story about a Cakravartin, Dalhalmani, who established a dynasty of Cakravartis that went for 7 generations. There was one Cakravartin after the other. And his lifespan was extremely long. It said that he spent 84,000 years playing about as a child and a youth, and 84,000 being a viceroy under the king, and then 84,000 as the king, and then 84,000 years as an ascetic. He renounced the world in the last quarter of his life and became a hermit. And this pattern was followed by his successors. And when he abdicated, when he renounced the throne, the wheel sank down and into the earth and disappeared. And his son, who was going to be the next king, asked what he should do, and his advisors told him, if you keep the precepts and keep the duties of a Cakravartin, then the wheel will reappear for you. The wheel is not an heirloom of your house; it has to be earned. And the duties of a Cakravartin are listed, and it includes uh, keeping morality, encouraging morality in the country, uh, uh, punishing the evildoers, and offering protection to all the people and also to the birds and beasts of the forest. And finally, the last one listed is provide well-being and necessities of life to the poor and helpless. And the dynasty ended with the seventh king, who neglected that last one. He didn't provide for the poor, and this caused people to turn to robbery and violence, and the kingdom broke down, and the wheel disappeared because he wasn't living up to its standards. And we could say that from what we know of the rule of Asoka, he appears to have tried to uh, fulfill these duties of the Cakravartin. That he had a quite a peaceful rule after after he converted to Buddhism. He did fight a couple of wars before he became a Buddhist, and the story about him is that we always have to be a little bit doubtful about the historical accuracy of stories about Asoka because he was so mythologized in later times. But the story is that he fought. His father had conquered. His father and his grandfather had conquered most of India, and there was just like the southern part left, and there was two kingdoms in the south, and he fought against one of them. And when he saw all the dead bodies on the battlefield, he had a strong emotional reaction to that, and then a Buddhist monk in his entourage taught him about impermanence of life and the value of not harming, and he renounced the sword and never conquered that last little kingdom in the southeast. He just left it alone. And his the most accurate historical remnant of Asoka's reign is the inscriptions. It was sort of like the ancient Indian equivalent of tweets. He would make announcements of his policies and ideas and carve them in stone in different languages, because India, of course, has dozens of different languages. And so this is kind of like a Rosetta Stone for modern archaeologists to help reconstruct some of these old languages. But he had these pillars all over the kingdom with these announcements and advice to the people and so forth. And a lot of them are on that theme of nonviolence, non-harming, and taking care of the poor, and having respect for monks and holy men of all different religions, not just Buddhism. He tried to offer support for all the different groups. So from what we can tell, Asoka really appears to have at least tried to follow the Buddhist ideal of kingship. He may be the only one, at least on that larger scale, who's ever done so. So I'll stop here and look at the questions in the chat. I think I've given a pretty decent overview. Okay, first question, nothing to do with theme. Is coffee considered an intoxicant according to Buddhist doctrine? Answer is no. The definition of an intoxicant is something, according to the precepts, is something that would make you act in a foolish or humiliating way. Uh, Ahsoka's legend is real or mystical? Ahsoka was definitely a real historical character, uh, but the actual verifiable historical records of his time are very scanty, and what we have uh, are the the rock inscriptions that I mentioned, and also some material that was written later, such as the Ahsoka Vedana, which is a very interesting and entertaining book, but it can hardly be called accurate history. It's full of so many magical things. Um, he was very much mythologized in later times. It was kind of considered, a golden age, and even non-Buddhists would look back to Ahsoka's reign as being, the glorious golden age of India, because much of Indian history was full of violence and fighting between kingdoms, but he had all of India united peacefully. If one of these beings lives in a series of 84,000 years, does that mean they develop physically and mentally at a slow rate? Yeah, that would be the implication, because it says it took 84,000 years to reach a full adulthood. Is W is a WTM or wheel turning monarch a bodhisattva? If so, why would a WTM spend all his lives working on perfections to not be a Buddha? Um, it can. I don't think it's necessary that he's a bodhisattva, but it is possible because the Mandata, the one who conquered all the heavens, he's this story comes from a Jataka, and he's listed as being one of the previous rebirths of Siddhartha Gautama. And Siddhartha Gautama actually says in one place that, the Buddha of our era, he said at one place that he was saying many, many times, I've been in every kind of condition. Many times I've been Saka. Many times I've been the wheel turning monarch. So on. The Earth used to have just one single continent. Could the Chakravartin idea be remnant of an extinct civilization back to the first Buddha of our aeon billions of years ago? That's an interesting thought. That what's that continent? Gondwana land? Is that the one big united continent? Um, of course, mainline scientific tradition would say there was there's no human beings at that time. It's an interesting thought. I hadn't looked at it that way before. In MPN Sutta, the Buddha says, I guess that's Mahaparinirvana. The Buddha says if society holds on to their traditions, they will prosper. Yes, that's Mahaparinirvana. Does this support conservatism in all societies or only some? How would we interpret this in an orthodox sense? Yeah, this is the Buddha's advice to the Vajjayans. When he was asked, how can a republic long survive and prosper? And he lists 7 things they should do. And they mostly have a quite conservative bent. He says that you should hold on to the old traditions of the society and not change them. So I think in a modern, if we want to apply that to a modern state, my idea would be that we should uphold the Constitution. You shouldn't go against the Constitution. Glad to have you back. Thank you, Ted. Mahasi Sayadaw said only one object, knowing of object, and no third. But Bahaya Sutta says in seeing there's only seeing, since there is only the knowing of the object and no object thought. In seeing there's only the seeing. I don't see how that contradicts Mahasi Sayadaw. There's a seeing, and what's seen is the object. I I think in the meaning in the Bahaya Sutta is that um, the senses are separate. There's seeing, just seeing. It's not feeling and hearing and so on. Someone says my audio has a weird feedback when I speak louder. I'm just using the built-in mic on the computer, so I'm not. I do have a plug-in mic. I haven't been using it because it's a bit fussy. Lucky he built the pillars. Otherwise, you'd call him mythology like you do everything else. Okay. Yes. Can you share a few thoughts on the relevance of the Cakravartin principles in our times? How can we have peace and well-being on Earth, or is it just not possible now? Well, I think this is, part of the meaning of the Cakravarti mythology. I'll continue to call it that because the only way that this worked was if magical things like the jewels from the sea and the wheel in the sky. I think their actual practicality is this is samsara. It's always going to be broken. We're never going to have a perfect world. You said centering in chitta is like being in a cabin, seeing a blizzard, not being affected by it. Before you used metaphor for nibbana, this makes it seem chitta and nibbana are the same. Some would interpret it that way. I think you could read some of Ajahn Mun's teaching in that way, it's a very esoteric and subtle question in relation of chitta and nibbana, and there are different takes on it. Mount Meru and the four continents are only perceptible from the first jhana onwards. Okay. You said psychic powers can only get you up to the realm of Brahma's retinue. Why can't people with psychic powers visit higher realms, the Rupa Loka? Well, I'm not sure they can't, but it's not. It's listed in the description of the psychic powers. It only speaks about as high as the Brahma Loka. You said in previous talk the life essence is a mental formation, but in Sutta where Buddha was asked if his force was the same as the Rupa, he refused to answer the question. Why would he do that? I think it's one of those questions that is it's any answer he gives would be misleading. The life essence is considered an immaterial factor in the Abhidhamma, but it obviously has a relationship to Rupa. I understand the wheel was a sort of flow chart, a way to organize thought. One thinks of the 12-spoke wheel representing the three duties of each of the Four Noble Truths. Now, that's one part of the symbolism of the Dhammachakra. The Dhammachakra is the symbolic wheel of the Buddha's enlightenment. The wheel of the wheel-turning monarch was called the Anachakra, or the wheel of authority, or the wheel of power. The Buddha says in Samyutta Nikaya that all that can be known is through the six senses. And anyone claiming to know something outside is just meaningless. Where does that leave nibbana? Well, you can't, if someone knows nibbana, they can't speak of it. It can't be described. So, that's it's outside of the six senses. Was there some similar symbolism for the wheel of the Cakravartin? That was referring to the previous question about the 12 spokes and the Four Noble Truths and the three aspects. I haven't seen it broken down in that way. There's the description of the wheel that is given in some detail. It goes on for at least a couple of pages, and in quite minute detail in the Pali. It makes it sound like very much like a physical object. Mm. Dhammapada says mind perceives all things. Does that mean it perceives the five aggregates that make it up? You always want to take things in such a literal way. The Dhammapada is poetry, so you can't parse it in that kind of very technical way. Does having a wheel turning monarch promote a globalist view? Uh, Good question. It sort of does, but um, it also then we have to take the whole magical aspect into account. The only person we could trust to rule the world would be a wheel turning monarch. Would be someone who keeps the precepts and has all these powers uh, and so forth. And anyone claiming to have such high authority lesser than that is somehow going to be corrupt and cause more problems. Is there any mention of who the next Chakravarti will be? Yes. Uh, at the time of Maitya Buddha, the coming Buddha, there will also be a Chakravarti named Sanka. They'll rule simultaneously and or exist simultaneously. And before the end of Sanka's life, he will renounce the throne and become a monk under the teaching of Maitya. Has there been a Chakravarti in recorded history? No, unless you count Asoka as a one-continent Chakravarti. I won't even bother with this one. This is like a question from a message board for Marvel Comics or something. If beings from the 31 realms had to fight to a death, which would win? Do wheel-turning emperors need to use force to stop law-breaking? If not, why is crime not a problem? Yeah, that's a question I'm not sure that uh, I have a definitive answer to, because it said on the one hand it says he rules without stick or sword, but one of his duties is to um, constrain the evildoers. Um, I think this is again, is mythological uh, framework of people being overawed by the power of this wheel. Um, Certainly, in if taking it down to earth, if we take the reign of King Asoka, he did he did punish criminals and so forth, but there's also some evidence from one of the pillars that he abolished the death penalty, which was absolutely revolutionary at the time. Even down to quite recent times, it was very common in most of the world just to chop off people's heads for small crimes. Is there a place for Kuan Yin in Theravada? Why do some Theravada sects have Kuan Yin statues? Well, Kuan Yin is not part of Theravada officially, but I have seen Kuan Yin statues in Theravada temples. I think people just like it, and Buddhists generally tend to be kind of flexible and open-minded, and not always taking a stand on strict orthodoxy. What parts of Buddhist cosmology did the Buddha himself talk about? Uh, the basic framework, Mount Meru and the four continents and the different heaven worlds. You can find the basic framework in the suttas, but all the elaborate details and stories generally come from the commentaries. so be later than the Buddha. But the basic framework does come from the original uh, teachings of the Buddha, as far as we have the record of them. Okay, so I'll put an end here, and thank you all for coming. And it's good to be back. I'm not sure what we'll do next week. We'll play it by ear, but we'll do something next week. And may you all have a good week. Bye now.